Daniel, things are crazy. Things are going, things are happening in Belarus. I want to understand everything that's going on there. It's ridiculous. So first of all, I want to organize my thoughts when it comes to Belarus, okay? Before we talk about politics, before we talk about who's against who in Belarus, who won, who lost, who cheated. Spoiler alert. I want to understand a little bit of the background, a little bit of the history of Belarus, just to set up the stage. Can you do that for me? Help me understand.
Uh, well, I will try to answer as short as I can because otherwise we will get into too much details. So first of all, Belarus is located in the westernmost part of from Russia. Like so, uh, it borders Russia on its eastern border. To the south lays Ukraine, and to the northwest you have Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. So it's important to understand that you have some EU countries on one side of the border. You've got Ukraine, which is now very hostile to Russia, and you've got Russia itself on the eastern border. And while Belarus itself, as a country, it never existed before 1991, and it was an integral part of first the Soviet Union, and beforehand, for almost like 400 years, most of the country in its current borders belonged to the Russian Empire, while some smaller parts they belong to Poland, uh, but uh, those parts they after the annexation 1939 they became part of Belarus, but at that time it was not an independent entity. It was just a republic inside the USSR. And some more details I think it's very important to mention is that uh, the amount of Russians who live inside Belarus is like less than 10% of ethnic Russians, but at the same time, Russian is not only one of the official languages in Belarus, it's actually the main language, so most of the people in Belarus they speak Russian. The government issues all its documentation, most of the documentation in Russian. The president of Belarus he speaks in Russian with his citizens, and the economy of Belarus is tightly connected to Russia, uh, and it depends on Russia because they get a lot of economical aid from Russia. Uh, so, uh, in this sense, Belarus is not only a very young country, it's also culturally and economically, it depends on Russia.
Wow, okay. So, okay, this is good. I want to talk about this a little bit more before we dive into what's actually going on right now in Belarus. I think I said Belarusia, and if I'm not mistaken, the correct way is the way you said it, the way you pronounce it, Belarus. So, okay, before we understand what's going on there, you mentioned Russia, you mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned the economical dependency. I wonder how that happened. So I will say what I know, and then I'll ask what you think about that. So to me, always felt like people don't really understand Russia. People don't really understand who are Russians, right? So maybe our listeners would know that Belarus is mostly Russians, right? But maybe if we kind of dwell a little bit on that, right? So in Russia, there is actually lots of different people, ethnic groups, and they all consider themselves Russians, right? If I'm not mistaken, it's somewhere around 150 different ethnic groups that all consider themselves Russian, right? With nothing wrong with that. It's just part of Russia's demography. And so when you say, when you describe that Belarus is so closely related to Russia culturally and economically, on the cultural side, well, it's actually like the backyard, right? So it's just the backyard of Russia. And on the economical side, so my question number one is, what do you think about my comments? If you agree, and then on the economical side, my question: how did Belarus even get to that? How how did it get to a situation where they depend economically on Russia? I mean, if they're bordering Lithuania, um, sorry, Latvia. I'm pretty sure it's Latvia. I always confuse the two countries. Names are so similar. Ukraine, okay, also part of the previous USSR bloc, but then Belarus is so close to Europe. So how come they're so dependent on Russia? So that's what I'm interested to hear. And then lastly, I want to ask: is Belarusia the same as Ukraine? Because we've heard about the people's uprising, the revolution, whatever you might want to call it, in Ukraine. Is it just the same thing that's happening in a bordering country now in Belarus?
I think that you've got a great point with this Belarus, pronunciation thing, because actually, because it's a very new country and people used to make use of the Russian way to pronounce it. Like, for example, as Ukraine used to be called the Ukraine, used to use this the Ukraine, and now you don't use it because in Russia you refer to the Ukraine. And the same thing is with Belarus, actually with Georgia, the country Georgia, not the state. People used to pronounce it the way it was correct to pronounce it in Russian. And because the question is how like to pronounce it correctly. So usually you prefer to pronounce it the way that the local people like to pronounce it, and the Belarusians, they you do call them Belarusians, but they call their country Belarus and not Belarussia. Concerning the ethnicities in Russia, well, you are certainly correct, and you say that you've got a lot of different ethnicities in Russia. You can think, about like for example, the states. You've got people from all over the world, and naturally in Russia it's a bit different. It's less about migration; it's more about conquest, but like historical conquest, and the most of those different peoples who Russia uh, conquered hundreds years ago, they are now think of themselves as Russians, even though some of them are aware of their ethnicity. Uh, but I think that we should make a very big distinction between like the Slavic group. So you've got the Slavic Orthodox groups in Russia, and that's why actually the Belarusians and the Ukrainians, they were usually much more connected to Russians than, for example, Kazakhs or Kyrgyz, because they weren't Slavs, and they weren't Orthodox Christians. They were Muslims, and they were tribal people. So from a cultural perspective, Russians and Belarusians or the Ukrainians, they're much closely knit together. And I think that it's very important to understand that for many Russians, Belarusians are much closer to them than even some ethnicities who reside inside Russia itself. The economical dependency on Russia has to do a lot with the way the Belarusian economy is built. So Lukashenko, their reigning still after that the reigning president, he tried actually to retain some kind of a Soviet-style economy, which is highly dependent upon big industrial factories, most of which disappeared. For example, in Russia itself, and also in the Ukraine. But in Belarus, he was able to retain it all. But how he was able to do it? Because once the Soviet Union collapsed, most of the industrial production they used to produce there, it was unable to compete with the open economy production, and they had to close them. And exactly because of that economical help on one side, which provided him the ability to pay people actually more than they were supposed to get, and this economical help from Russia, and at the same time Russia provided money, and she got this produce from Belarus. So the United States again uses a similar tactic. So it provides some aid, some economical aid, but then they demand that at least parts of this aid will be used to purchase American produce. And because Belarus is less than 10 million people and its economy is much smaller than Russia, so they have like 45, I think, percent of their import and export. They're dependent on Russia. And during all, naturally, this connection between Belarus and Russia from an economical perspective, it wasn't created in the 90s. It was created like hundreds of years before, but it was just reinforced. And while some other countries, they try to find some other markets, Belarus only deepened its ties on Russia proper in that time, in that period. Well, yes, I think that also once you speak about a difference between Ukraine and Belarus, it's a very important thing to understand, because most of the people, who don't know that area, they think it's just another small country, and you need to get into much details to understand. But there is a significant difference between Ukraine and Belarus, because Ukraine, first of all, it's much bigger. It was like about 45 million people before the annexation and before the war. So it's quite a significant European country, at least from population and size-wise. And Belarus is much smaller. Moreover, while the Ukraine, it was historically the borders it acquired had to do with the end of World War II, and only the eastern part of Ukraine, like about like half, belonged to the Russian Empire, while the other half, it used to belong to, some of it belonged to, it was part of Poland, and later it was part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the people there, they became Sovietized, let's use that name, only after World War II, while the other half lived under Russian rule for more than 300 years. So while Ukraine is and still is separated into two groups, like one which is called like kind tend they don't like Russians, and some of them fought against Russia in the Second World War. The other half is they actually at least before the crisis in 2014 they always were very pro-Russian. And in Belarus it was never the case, except these small chunks that used to belong to Poland before 1939, and most of this population moved out. So most of the country they are still pro-Russians, and the country is very homogenic. You don't have any significant geographical differences, and the people there they speak in Russian, and they don't think that Russians are their enemies, or they are totally Sovietized, if you can use that word. Uh,
Yeah, this all really makes sense now. It makes sense why people refer to Belarus um, as the backyard of Russia, because judging by what you just explained, it's just the same people, right? Across the border. That's it. Okay, so that's very interesting. There's difference between Ukraine and Belarus. Um, Fair enough. You know, historical differences, as you mentioned, the Russian Empire that controlled all the way to the Poles. And, you know, this podcast, I love history. You, of course, know history, and I'm pretty sure you love it as well. But this podcast is more about politics, right? So politics in Belarus. Um, there is three figures right now that, well, actually four, but well, I will explain why I said three. So the three figures are Tikhanovskaya, Babarika, and Tsepkala. Now, between Tsepkala and Babarika, I might confuse the two, but if I'm not mistaken, um, Tsepkala was working for Lukashenko about 20 something years ago when Lukashenko first ran for presidency. And at a certain point, I don't know when, they decided to diverge, right? So I doubt him. I doubt his legitimacy. It kind of feels like he is saying all the right things, but it kind of feels like if you work that closely with that type of person, and we'll talk about who Lukashenko is in this episode as well. But if you knew who that person is and you still worked with him, then I would doubt your character. So Tsepkala, that's how I categorize him. Babarika, Babariko, I think that's the correct pronunciation. Um, Sorry, Babarikov. He work worked for prominently a Russian company, oil company. And oil in Russia, that's even if formally it's not a state company, it's very closely coupled with the Kremlin, very closely coupled with Putin himself. Um, so to me, that person, Babarikov, seems like he is just another person sent by Kremlin, by Putin's team to replace Lukashenko. And again, we can talk about, and we should, we will we'll talk about why Putin would do that. And at this point, it might all seem to be confusing, like so many opposing forces, but then they're together, right? Because Lukashenko and Putin, they're on the same side. So why would Putin send somebody to replace Lukashenko, right? But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So to me, the main person to be introduced here in this very confusing plot is Tikhanovskaya. So there is Tikhanovskaya and there is Tikhanovsky. That basically means husband and wife, right? That's the way the Russian language is constructed. So uh, you have the same last name, but it's just a different ending based on your sex. So Tikhanovsky, he is actually a really, in my opinion, legitimate opposition from the people, from the Belarusian people. So what he did, he was at the beginning um, business person, right? That was just he wasn't like a billionaire. I don't even know if he was a millionaire. But he was doing business, right? Selling some stuff. I don't know specifically what. And honestly, it doesn't matter to me. And at a certain point, he decided to go into politics because he has seen so much corruption in his country, right? In Belarus. And so what he did, and he actually has a channel on YouTube, and he recorded everything. So what he did, he just went from village to village, from town to town, from city to city, and he just interviewed people directly, right? So you have to understand, like in Belarus and Russia and ex-Soviet countries, uh, things you see on the TV is very state sponsored. There is, we can talk hours about how, why that's happening, but that's what's happening, right? So this Tikhanovsky, he said, I presume, he said, okay, let's show the people what is actually going on in our country. We know what's going on in our country, but let's show them so that everybody understands, right? Our problems and what's going on, because you can know what's going on in one city, but what's going on in other villages and other parts of the city, other parts of the country, if your TV, the only channel you see in is state sponsored, you're never going to know what's going on there. So he started that as a blogger, right? And it appeals to me, right? Because he literally, you can see videos where he's heart to heart talking to people and asking what's going on in their lives, what are the challenges, what are the problems, and it, to me, that is legitimate opposition. And so, of course, he was jailed. I'm not even going to go into the reason why he was jailed. And before he was jailed, he was barred from running, becoming a candidate, a president candidate. Um, and so their plan was to basically, they said, okay, Tikhanovskaya, his wife, she will compete, right? And Lukashenko, in not such a smart move on his own, decided to let her actually run because, well, he thought that she can't win against him because she's a woman. Let's just say things the way they are. He almost bluntly said it. Well, not almost, he actually said that. Okay, what happened to Tsepkala and Babarikov? Tsepkala and Babarikov were barred from running as well. So, one, because he understood that the Kremlin sent him, and the other is because, well, it's his person, he should be under him and not the other way around. Um, so, we fast forward to the elections, and if I'm not mistaken, the elections happened on the 9th or on the 10th of August of 2020, of course. And people knew change is coming. Change was in the air in Belarus. And there was a meme. Somebody did a poll, um, pre-election poll, and Lukashenko got 2%, right? And everybody started laughing and saying, we are 98% of the country. And at that point, Lukashenko started worrying, right? And um, he lost. I kind of fast forwarding. I was planning on talking less than this. He lost. He lost the people. He knew it, and then during the election, he just and this is what I want to hear. Daniel, I want to hear what you think about everything that I'm saying right now, and in particular, I want to hear what your thoughts on the voting system in Belarus, right? So he basically drew, in my opinion, he drew numbers, right? Because they announced that 80% he won, Lukashenko won with 80%. Everybody in Belarus knew what's going on. Everybody knew he cheated. Everybody knew the system just cheated. There were so many recordings of yeah, anyway, I won't get into those small nitty-gritty details. We can in the future, in this episode, if you want to talk about that, Daniel. But everybody knew he cheated, so everybody went out on the streets. Everybody is telling him, "Go home. We don't want you." But no, his claws, they don't want to let go. And he's talking about Belarus as if it's his own property. It's disgusting just listening to it. So, what do you think, Daniel? Do you agree with me about the position? Do you agree that those four figures, are the main figures? And by the way, to our listeners, Tikhanovskaya, there is a lot to be told about Tikhanovskaya, but she didn't really want to be a politician. She wants to help her people through this transition phase. She offered, after she wins in 6 months, to have another election, this time fair, allowing all the opposition to run and releasing all political prisoners. And her husband is actually the one that wanted to be a politician and was striving to it. So, yeah. So, what do you think about Tikhanovskaya Tsepkala? What do you think about Babarikov? Is my logic sane here?
Well, Pavel, thanks for this quite a thorough summary. Though I don't agree with you on some points, like for example, you mentioned Tsepkala and you said that for you he's not a viable candidate because he actually, it was like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, he was a technical expert advisor of Lukashenko. So he was practically really, from a technical point of view, he's like an IT man. And you must understand, I think it's important to understand that in a country like Belarus, where practically everything is controlled by the state, it's extremely difficult to build a career being just an independent. So for me, it's not a line in his biography which will make me to rule him out for eternity. Also, I don't think that if someone works for gas company, yeah, like Bobariko did, and if this company has is owned by Russia or has some ties with Russia, it doesn't make him an agent, because you've got very different people who work in such companies, managers. It's a career path, and once again, because of this economy structure, uh, there the money lies. Like in Russia, in Belarus, the money lies in companies of that kind, and not in the IT sector, for example, like in the States or in the West. Uh, and after all, it's not going to make you an agent if you just work somewhere. I also don't think that Putin had his man in the elections. I don't think that he did. And it has to do with the fact, like with the realities of the ties between Belarus and Russia, because Putin cannot afford having his own man, and if he did, I mean, it will ruin the ties between Lukashenko and Putin completely. And this is an important issue because if we speak about democratic governments, even in countries like, if you will think about like France or Germany, even here, the personal connection between the leaders is important. But after all, it is secondary because you've got a much stronger uh, public opinion, and you've got the Foreign Affairs Office, and it has its own traditions, and you've got different powers, and one single person can't ruin such ties. But in case of people authoritarian regimes, so it's very different, and it's enough for two people, like Lukashenko and Putin, to hate each other, and if they really do, actually they do hate each other, but they don't want to ruin their relations, so they never admit it, openly at least. They never said that they hate each other, and you will never hear some too blunt accusations. So, in any case, it would be if Putin would try to push his men. First of all, these men would be arrested, and you can say, yeah, Babariko was arrested, but he was arrested just because Lukashenko was able to understand that his power is limited, and that Babariko, in the eyes of many people, he's like a big manager. He has a lot of experience of uh, in in managing, in management. So it's not just someone from the street, and people could say, okay, we are not just electing anybody. No, we are electing a person with a lot of experience, with managerial experience, so he knows what to do. I tend to agree with you about what you said, like about Tikhanovsky, and but still, I think, in my opinion, that's all secondary, because if we were speaking about elections in a democratic state, there you've got true elections and parties. What you said, it would be extremely important. But the situation in Belarus is totally different. You don't have any real elections. So practically, even before the elections is going to happen, you know that it's all going to be faked in advance. So you know it. You don't have any real opposition. The only opposition that can run, it will be those people whom Lukashenko will allow to run. And here, what you actually said about Tikhanovskaya, that's true. Although I wouldn't say that the only reason he gave her to run has to do with her the fact that she's a woman. Though certainly it did play a significant role, because Lukashenko, he holds like an old style chauvinistic views. Actually, it's part of his entourage. He always plays this role, and actually it made him popular for a certain amount of time. Very popular, especially if you take like the older people who grew up and matured in the Soviet Union, because for them he symbolizes stability. Uh, So yes, he thought that she was just a woman. I mean, her husband did something, and he was quite popular. He was like a popular blogger, but who is she? She's like nobody. And he knew that he must uh, at least make the elections look like it shouldn't look like a complete fraud. So you must have a certain candidate, like a really oppositional candidate. And he thought that if he will choose her, he will win. And here I think the really interesting part starts. So as I said, you don't have any real parties. So in fact, most of the people in Belarus, after 26 years of Lukashenko being their almighty president, they got tired of him. And actually, it started at least a dozen years ago, because I think that, Pavel, you said that he had like 2%, but we must understand this poll was like it was conducted on, I don't know, like on Twitter or somewhere, or in some groups which were in the first place anti-Lukashenko. So it doesn't represent the real picture. But I think that his real rating in Belarus is probably about 20-25%, and it probably was much higher even in the last elections. But since then, nothing changed to the better. Lukashenko only got older, and the economy didn't move a bit. So you must understand, like most of the people who used to vote for him, so a good share of them got tired of it. Uh, and he used to forge the elections even before. I don't think that he ever got 80%. Maybe 20 years ago. It's possible, because he didn't. He ruined free press. I mean, he didn't. Once you don't have any real press, and you don't even have any real oppositional candidates, so you might have 80% in such conditions. It doesn't mean that his rating in a truly democratic regime would be 80%, but under the conditions he created, it was 80%. But now, even taking into account this new reality, his rating fell. Yeah, we must not forget the fact that internet happened since then, like Facebook, YouTube, Telegram, WhatsApp, Twitter. All those technologies happened, and a lot of people, they don't get their information from state TV as they used to. But if I will at least tell like what I think about it, so for most of the people, Tikhanovskaya, it doesn't really matter much what will be the name of the other candidate, as long as it will be a real oppositional candidate, someone who is going to compete against Lukashenko and who is going to stop his rule. So the name is not important. The people are just tired of the dictator, and they wanted to get rid of him. So you could put there anyone. You could put there. You could compete against him, and I believe that most people will prefer you on Lukashenko. So in my opinion, that's the main thing here. I don't think that most Belarusians, they don't even have a specific idea of what exactly they want. I mean, they want some kind of democracy. They look to the West. They want to have some prosperous. They want to have prosperous country with a free economy and without all those limitations under which they live. But they can't. They can't really understand what exactly their needs are, uh, and it hopefully it will be decided in the next stage. But first of all, they need to get rid of that man. They need to put a stop to his rule, and only later they will have like truly free elections, and here they will be able to decide their future. But at that point of time, that's not about the oppositional
Yeah,
candidate.
Daniel, this is where
It's
I kind
about
of I have to some points I do agree with you, okay? I do agree with you that it's different the type of people you need to lead to have in your leadership when you're transitioning from a dictatorship to I don't want to use the phrase democracy too much. Democracy has its pros and cons. What I want to stress is moving from a dictatorship to a structure that depends on what the people want. Okay? So, moving from a dictatorship to a structure where the people that are at the head of the country depend on the people. Okay, so if the people choose differently, then they won't continue being there. So you can call it democracy, you can call it anything you want, right? But the point is not about democracy versus the world. The point is changing the structure so the people have a say in what's going on in their country. So, if you tell me, Paul, Babarikov, if he has a stronger personality and he can talk to, he can have good relationship with Putin and with other dictatorships, right? Because you're saying it's important the relationship. Okay, fine. But my question is, and I think it's the burning topic, right? If you choose wrong, if the Belarusian people choose wrong, and again they put on top, right? They put a president that is Lukashenko 2.0, then all of this was for nothing. And we're witnessing history right now. Okay, we're witnessing history. And this opportunity will not happen again. In my opinion, it won't even happen in the next 100 years. It's either they get it right now or they will never get it. This, to me, an event, and I'm not delusional. I understand this would have never happened if coronavirus wouldn't happen. It's a black swan that took down a weak regime. It was a weak regime, but it needed something to destabilize it, to force people to see what's going on in their country and force them out of their homes. If that wouldn't happen, nothing would have happened in Belarus. So you're not going to get another coronavirus in the next 100 years. You're just not. So right now is the time. And if Babariko ends up, and I get it. You're saying, Pavel, okay, don't be. You have to look at the facts, right? And there isn't a lot of facts that support that he is Putin's person. I agree with that. But I'm just saying that if they miscalculate and they support Babarikov or they support somebody else that's a person that was sent by Putin, then that's it. Another 100 years of delusions, another 100 years of not having a country for life. That's kind of the slogan, right, of the Tikhanovsky. Is If you go to his YouTube channel, you see "Country for Life," and I really relate to that. I really hope that the Belarusian people will have a country for life. The other points that you made, you know, um, as I said before, uh, it makes sense to me what you're saying, and I'm wondering what's going to happen next. I I ask myself all the time, how should they act? Because, and you have alluded to that, there isn't there isn't an organized opposition at the moment. Of course, there isn't because Lukashenko really systematically destroyed it, right? But even in this situation, I'm wondering the crowds that go outside, what should they demand? There isn't really there is some demands, right? They put forward already, but it's not a unified demand. And in my opinion, if it was unified, it would have been destroyed a long time ago. So, like, I ask myself that question all the time. Maybe it's enough to put, like you're saying, to put anybody except Lukashenko on top. Maybe that person won't be strong enough to redo the things that Lukashenko did. And maybe that transition period will force Belarus into an era where they literally have a say in what's going on in their country and their votes are not being flipped and flopped like it doesn't even matter. So I'm wondering what you think about that. Tell me what you think about what's going to happen next, what should happen next, and is there even, and this is the burning, the important question. I really need an answer for myself, for our listeners. Will the Belarusian succeed?
Well, Paolo, thanks for your opinion. And however, well, I prefer to start from there. I don't agree with you. And the first thing that really jumped, like that bothered me, was that you said that in your opinion, if this revolution will fail, so they are not going to get any other chance. And you, for example, you named that like coronavirus that played a great role in the revolution, and you also mentioned Babariko. And your fear is that he's Putin's guy, and if he'll get to rule Belarus, so he's going to actually revert the possibility of any change. So, I would like actually to mention something, to act as the devil's advocate for a moment, and to explain that, like, we speak about a dictator, right? And you spoke about being popular. You said that you wish for the Belarusians to have a regime that will represent the people. So actually, Lukashenko, he was able to do it for quite a long time. Just to mention a few things, Belarus, yeah, it's not a rich country for sure. However, if you compare it with Ukraine, which lies just next to it, and they actually started from pretty much the same level with the breakup of the Soviet Union. Both countries were in a disarray. The economy collapsed. The planned economy collapsed. They had nothing to work upon. And the Belarusian economy, uh, the standards of living in Belarus, as far as I know, and we just speak about GDP figures. So in Belarus, they're about like twice as high, twice as high. Uh, well, how did he do it, like the Lukashenko? And he preserved a lot of the mechanisms of the Soviet Union, so work for everyone and not very high level of living, but he promised the people like you will get your job, and he built a lot. He built upon the financial aid from Russia, so he actually took money from the Russians and gave it to his own people. Uh, so he was popular. He was a popular guy. His government was popular. Yeah, his dictatorial rule, the way he ruled his people, it wasn't uh, it wasn't democratic from the very beginning. However, he was popular, and that's why I mention it. It's important mention it. It's important because what you said is that you don't think that they are going to get any other chance. Not another chance in 100 years. So you say, and I will tell you, no, no, I don't agree with that because he was he was popular and he lost his popularity, and it happened before the coronavirus. It happened before those elections. Those elections, they only showed everyone how unpopular he became. And yeah, the coronavirus, it contributed to it, but actually from this economic point of view, you know that the government of Lukashenko, probably one of the countries that did less. Like almost, they had almost no restrictions on the economic activity. He actually said that one of the reasons for that is that their country is not so not rich enough. But I think that most of the people only thought that he was becoming really delusional because he denied practically the coronavirus. He didn't say that it doesn't exist, but he said that it's, like Trump did, like what Trump said at the beginning. So he continued to do it the whole way, the whole time. So what I mean is that first of all, he became unpopular, and his fall, like any dictator who doesn't have any new ideas, who can't give his people nothing new. So he became unpopular with the time passing. Like 10 years ago, he still was quite popular. 5 years ago, he started to lose his popularity, I would say, like about 10 years ago. The majority of the people started losing faith in him. So I think that it's always a matter of time. But certainly, once you live in a country like Belarus and you say, well, he will fall, but not now, like maybe in 6 years and 5 years. So, yeah, certainly for a person, for any adult person, for it's a long time. Like 5 years is a long time. So certainly it's important. If he will fall now, it will be better than if he will fall in 5 years. That's one thing. The other thing is Babariko. So you said that you think it's like Putin's protege or something. So as I said, I don't see any evidence for that. Moreover, and it's important as well, like you could say that Yanukovych was like a supporter of Putin, kind of. He got money from him. But at the end, was he able to do what he wanted? Actually, no. And actually, people tend to forget that the main cause of the revolution in Ukraine, 2014, was the fact that Yanukovych promised European integration. Yeah, he was like a pro-Russian guy, but he promised European integration the whole way. But then the Europeans, they needed money. The Ukrainians needed money. Their economy really sucked, and they asked for the Europeans to help them. And the Europeans, they told them, no, we are not going to give you any money. And the Russians told them, well, yes, we are ready to give you money, but it means that you are going to stop your process of trying to get into Europe. Actually, the Russians wanted to have a similar process, but together with Ukraine, kind of an integrating process, but on their own terms. And once Yanukovych accepted it, and he said, well, we're stopping this European integration process. And then actually it started the revolution. So, and look, yeah, never in any case. So you could say Lukashenko is Putin's man. He's Putin's man. Yeah, he gets money from him and he blah 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 and supports Russia in the UN most of the, like 99% of the time. But well, do you think that Lukashenko is really Putin's man? No, he's not Putin's man. He's doing what he really wants. He's like he got his own understanding of the situation, and he actually has a lot of conflicts with Putin. And the two guys, they hate each other. So I think that even if he's like kind of pro-Russian in his attitude, uh, well, and not well, it can play it can be bad for the Belarusians eventually. But I think that actually the most like the best case scenario will be for them to have someone in Belarus who will be able to maintain good relations with Russia and with the European Union at the same time, because otherwise they will divide the country, and I don't think that you want to do it. You just need for the people to understand. Well, we are friendly towards Russia, but if we have some economic interest in the West, so we will do it, and we will also do our business with the Russians. Why not? you should, use your cards the best way you can. And well, Pavel, concerning, your main question, will the Belarusians succeed? So it's actually, it's all about that. But unfortunately, I think that I cannot provide any, viable answer, and I will try to explain it. So, uh, as you said, you've got a very uh, shaky situation. So you've got some opposition, like a lot of people who are on the streets, but they don't have any leaders. You don't really understand what exactly they want. And actually, that's exactly the case in most revolutions. So otherwise, if you've got a very well-defined political forces, it won't be a revolution. It will be just, a transition of power. So that's the main idea behind revolution. And here, I want to get a bit into history, not too much, but, just to make a few things clear. So, you've got a few examples which are well known in the West, and everyone usually thinks about them. You've got like successful revolutions, and most of the time you speak like about the American Revolution or the Glorious Revolution in Great Britain, uh, and you've got the French Revolution. So yeah, the American Revolution, it was a story of success, even though it's from a certain point of view. I don't want to get into much details, but it wasn't a revolution on the scale of, for example, the French Revolution. So actually, they just got rid of the power of the king, but a lot of things didn't really change. They were already built in the states the way they were. It doesn't matter. So the Glorious Revolution, it wasn't also such a tremendous uh, event from the point of view that they preserved most of the system, and they already had the forces behind those change. They played a great role in the old regime as well. But the French Revolution is a good example of a significant change of the power system. So actually they destroyed the old hierarchy. But what happened next? At first you had a very mild revolution of some bourgeoisie who just wanted the government to share power with them, the aristocracy and the church. But very fast it deteriorated into mass violence, and they started to guillotine people. And then, few years later, suddenly you have Napoleon, who declares himself the emperor. After he fall, you have the Bourbon monarchy restored. And then you've got another revolution, 1830, which eventually fails. And then you have another Republican people revolution in 1848. And who comes to power first? It's like the person who leads you can say, the people. It's Napoleon. It's the nephew of Napoleon who, well, he becomes the emperor. Like on the year or two later, declares himself to be Napoleon III, and he rules France until France loses the war against the Germans in 1870-71, and he was actually he fell. He was imprisoned by the Germans. So he lost his power not because he was like the people got rid of him. No, actually, he was quite popular up to that point. And only then you have this Third Republic in France. And even in this Third Republic, you had a lot of very pro-monarchist powers for a long period of time. And you can say, well, what is it actually? It is 80 years. Is it like a transition? What's going on? Yeah, and you can say it's a transition. It's a transition, but it's a very long transition. And despite of all those revolutions, things did not change in one moment. It took ages for them to change. So if we will just think about Ukraine, there you had more recent events. So you had this Yanukovych who was like almost elected in 2004, and then the people got out. They claimed that there were forgeries in the elections, and his opponent Yushchenko got power, and he was very popular at the beginning. Yeah, he like saved the people. I don't know. And after a couple of years, he became unpopular. Uh, and what happened next? That's funny thing. Yanukovych was elected, like the first time he failed it. Then he was elected by the same people who got out on the streets, and they elected him again. So, but after a few years, you have another revolution, 2014, 13, 14. They got rid of Yanukovych eventually, and they had Poroshenko. It was also very popular. And actually, if you will think about it, like what you said about like personalities, like Babariko, like Poroshenko was the opposite of Yanukovych, and he was a billionaire. The guy is a billionaire. He knows how to run a business, and his business was not some oil or some stuff. No, he had like different, very diverse business, but well, he was a complete failure as a president, a complete failure. And then now the Ukrainians got another president. And it's an ex-comedian. No, it's Zelensky. It's an ex-comedian. And then he was elected. He was extremely popular. People thought, well, he does not belong to these, mighty rich people. He's one of us. He's going to make a change. Well, he's like in power, like, I don't know, about a year now. He didn't do that much. We already can tell. So, what does it mean? What's the perspective of Belarus? Well, it means that everything is complicated, and the fact that they don't have any leaders, it only adds to that. So it makes everything unpredicted. We can't predict what will happen. Concerning, what you said about what should they demand, I think that they pretty much demand the things. They just don't have any, specific force. Though they do have now these people who like kind of represent I don't know, the protesters, but it's not exactly clear who chooses them, who chose them actually, and whom they represent. But let's assume that they do. But still, like, what do they want? They want to cancel the elections. They want new elections. They want to free all political prisoners. So it's all good and smart, but and it's smart and it's good, and they certainly should do it. But what will come next? Even if they succeed to force the government to do it, whom the people will choose, what powers, and how these powers are going to act? That's terra incognita. We don't know. However, I'm a bit optimistic because I think that they don't want to get back to this system they had. So they would like to have some kind of a European integration, and the Belarusians, they've got like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia at their borders. Yeah, these countries are not. It's not like Western Europe, but what they were able to achieve in the last like 25, 30 years, it's very significant because people's lives turned to the better. However, and it's also very important, the European Union invested heavily in those countries. Is it going to invest heavily in Belarus? No, because you can't do much without money and this political effort. And if they will do it, so I think that things will turn out well. I hope things will turn out well. But, like 2014, the Ukrainian Revolution, 2020, 6 years passed, and we still can't clearly understand what's the result of this revolution is. Like, is it even positive or negative? It's difficult to tell. People got more or less freedom because Ukraine wasn't a totalitarian or authoritarian state. As I mentioned, they had different presidents the whole time. But this oligarchic system they still have it today. So the revolution didn't change it. They don't have viable democracies after 6 years later. So, no, if you would like, if you will ask me, in 6 years, so how was this revolution? Maybe I will be able to provide a better answer. I certainly hope so.
Daniel, you touch on some really, really intriguing points: history, French Revolution, and the nature of revolutions and their progression. It's just so sad to think about that sometimes. I reject it. A good friend of mine said, I reject your reality and substitute it with my own. I know you're right. Most revolutions, they don't really end all that well. They don't really end, especially the way that people think they will end, right? So when you go out to the streets, I presume, I never actually did that. Um, when people go out to the streets, they think, okay, now is the time. We feel it in our hearts. We know things will change. Things we will get rid of this dictator, and then we will live like Europe. Then we will live like in the States or other countries, right? So that's what they dream of. That's what they want. Not just in Belarus, also in other countries in the world. And the fact of the matter is that the road to changing your country to the better, really change it to the better, not empty words, is very long and very treacherous. So I get that. That's my brain talking. But then my heart is talking and saying, no, no. Maybe there is a chance. There is a chance. There must be a chance. I really wish for the Belarusian people to succeed. I really want them to succeed. It is challenging, I agree. In terms of what their leadership is like, or what they should do next, it's a hard question, right? Like, I feel like if people knew the exact formula, they would have uh, they would have came out with it a long time ago and said, this is what we need to do. They would have convinced all the opposition parties to support that plan. But it's that's not the case. People don't know what to do, and I can only speculate, you know. So I don't want to take the full credit for this idea. You and me previously spoke about that. Not in this chapter, and not in this podcast. Just personally, but I think I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be a full assurance to the previous regime that they will not be prosecuted. It's very painful to say because a lot of them committed crimes. I don't want to get into the level of crimes they committed, but some of them are very bad people. But you need to do that. You need to do that, and that's mostly the idea that you gave to me, right? So I'm giving you the credit here. You need to give them this feeling of safeness, right? Like, okay, we're gonna lose, we're gonna lose our position of power. We're gonna lose everything, but they're offering us sort of a peace, right? Amnesty, I think is the word, or maybe I'm using the wrong word. Well, they won't prosecute us, right? So in that point, the regime will say, okay, why are we supporting Lukashenko? Like, the people is definitely not with him, and those people are, straight up offering us um, a good deal. We just should switch sides, right? And that point, not only the good part of the regime, right? Not only the good people that do serve this regime switch side, but also the bad people. And Lukashenko is left with no one. And I think the same deal should be struck with Lukashenko, right? Like, I think it would be for the better if he stays in Belarus after he relinquishes power, and like this is a very clean scenario. We're not, I'm not even addressing all the intervention that might happen from different countries. Specifically, I mean Russia. There's just so much to talk about, right? Like I think if we didn't limit ourselves, we probably could have went on for about 10 hours recording this podcast, this chapter. But we will, we'll just break it into different episodes, and we will come back in our second episode with more interesting topics that are relevant to the scenario and build a better picture of what's going on there. So back to my idea. So partially your idea as well. That's the deal that they have to offer them, and they have to convince them that this makes sense. Right? Lukashenko will keep on rejecting it, and he will keep on fighting it. But if you convince enough of the key people in his regime, uh, I think it's possible. At that point, I think what's needed is a transition mechanism. You basically said in this episode similar things, right? It doesn't really matter who at this point. I hope that it's going to be somebody that I feel in my gut that that person deserves it. But I'm not a Belarusian, and I'm definitely not a citizen in Belarus, so I don't get to decide. But I'm a person, and I live in a free country, so I have the right for my opinion. And I think if a person that deserves it gets it, I think they can do a better job to help the country in this transition to make sure that things are done properly. After that comes all the fun stuff, right? So after this transition period, I think we mentioned this already in this episode, right? I'll just quickly repeat it. All the political opponents of Lukashenko must be released from jail. Like, no trials, no nothing. If a person was involved in politics, you must release him. Yes, some would in Belarus say, "Are you crazy? I mean, this is our, uh, you can't really release criminals, right? Because at the end of the day, by the system, they're charged with some crime, right? Like if you go to countries and you say, okay, now you release criminals, that's a problem. Uh, but it's a hit that the judicial system, I think, yeah, that's the appropriate terminology, in Belarus has to take. They have to release them, and after they release them, they have to give them legal uh, protection by law, right? That by law they will not be allowed to be prosecuted. And there are different laws, different uh, versions of that law in different countries, right? But politicians are always protected from prosecution. So that's what they have to do. And they have to allow all of those politicians to run for whatever office they choose to. And when they do that, they have to, the last key point, and all of this makes sense to everybody. And I think, listen, I'm not the author of this, although it feels like I am right now, but none of those ideas are new and innovative or anything like that. So the last point they have to make sure that they do properly is make sure they count all the votes properly. They have to make sure that it's all transparent. can't have situations like they had this time where people had to stand outside, the schools, the voting areas where they were counting votes outside and look with a goggle inside to see if there's any cheating. Those people have to be inside. They have to record it with cameras. And that's where a problematic approach. I know a lot of people have different opinions, but you have to allow everybody to watch what's going on like an eagle. And when you do that, there is very little chance for anybody in Belarus to cheat. And that's when you make the connection between what the people want and what's going on the political level in Belarus. Yeah, you can start throwing different terminology. I don't know, Democrats, maybe socialism or anything else. But at that point, I would argue with anybody that would say those terms. You need to allow the Belarusian people to make their decisions. They have the right. That's their lives. That's their country. And if they decide, you know what, even more, I would say, if they actually decide that they want some level of authoritarian or they don't want democracy, let's ask that. If they decide they don't want democracy, okay, that's their choice. As long as their choice is actually that, I believe they will choose democracy. I believe they will choose reforms. I believe that they will try to innovate and change the way the country operates. You say that you don't believe, you don't think, and you're a very logical person. Many times I agree what you're saying, and maybe in this instance I agree as well. Like, it will be very tough for them, but I think that they have a realistic chance of making it. I think that if they actually manage to choose a person, if they actually manage to, you know, overthrow Lukashenko and put as a president somebody that really cares, and that person starts reforms, and I won't go into details what type of reforms, but we can do a whole episode about that. After that happens, they will they will need talented, smart people, educated people. Well, guess what? The Belarusian people are very educated. Again, I can talk a lot about the level of their education, how, Belarusians, how successful they are around the world, what professions they engage in. Uh, they have the human capital. That's what matters, in my opinion. They have the human capital to succeed and be, a legitimate Western European country that lives peacefully with its neighbors, that grows economically and reinvests over and over again in the Belarusian people. I believe it. My logic tends to agree with you. My heart goes with the Belarusian people. And I truly hope that by the end of 2020, there's a new beginning for the Belarusian people.
Pavel, before we will finish, I would like to add just one more thing, because we spoke as if the fate of Lukashenko was already sealed. And, well, unfortunately, maybe it's not the case, because uh, it has to do with the fact how dictatorships, like authoritarian regimes of his kind, organized. They don't have any transparency. You don't understand the inner logic, the mechanisms behind the scene, the inner forces. So people know Lukashenko, but hardly, only some experts know some other people. And also, Lukashenko, he tends to change them and he can throw them away as he wishes. But uh, who? So, uh, due to that, I would like to note that uh, a lot depends on how the people who surround Lukashenko, how loyal are they to him, uh, and from on the one side, and on the other side is certainly the question of the of how are the protesters determined to achieve their goals. So maybe, and we don't know it yet, we can't really get a good glimpse on it. Maybe people around him are ready to abandon him and just another push, like another big demonstration uh, is going to, just to crush all his system. But maybe, they are ready to spill blood. They are ready to use violence to preserve force. So hopefully it is not the case. Hopefully we will see this transaction of power taking happening. But I just wanted to make it clear, even though I think that he will fall, but it's not yet decided.
Thank you, Daniel. This was a very interesting episode to record. I really enjoyed it. I hope our listeners enjoyed it as well. This was your host, Paul Kardash. I also go by Pavel, and your one and only expert, Dr. Daniel Fillin. And remember, be good to people for no reason at all.